I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I apologize. But we should get going, right? And I think there's only 8 of you fine people as it is anyway today. As I mentioned to some of the other people earlier, I've had requests to have the initial part of my class recorded. I'm not looking to record anybody else, so that's the reason why that's there. And then I'll be shutting it off. Okay? So we'll get started here. Oh, I wouldn't mind just listening to this for a while. So my name is Ken Smsi. I work as a critical care nurse at Hinsdale Hospital in Hinsdale. So I've been a nurse for more than 30 years. I look at, whenever somebody says that you're really a male nurse, I'll say, yeah, I couldn't afford the operation. Get over it. I love when people have to say that. Are you really a male nurse? No, I'm a female nurse. I just grew this beard to fool you. Anyway, so what we're going to be doing today, of course, is the American Heart Association's Healthcare Provider Renewal course. And your goals for today, of course, are for you to relearn adult/child/infant CPR, adult/child/infant AED, adult/child/infant BVM, bag valve mask, adult/child/infant BDU, barrier device use, and adult/child/infant FBAO, otherwise known as foreign body airway obstruction, aka choking. That's all of it in short. We'll have greater specificity with the objectives through the DVD that we're going to be utilizing today. The next thing I always like to go over is your syllabi, which is that staple packet that everybody should have in front of you. The first page of that staple packet goes over what we're doing, where we're at throughout this afternoon, so it's going to give you an idea. The second page of that staple packet is an algorithm, how to do CPR. If it looks the least bit familiar to you, awesome. If it doesn't, by the time we're done tonight, it will. The next page of that staple packet goes over a lot of numbers at the very top. It's a CPR reference tool. On the top, you have, again, a lot of numbers, and a lot of those numbers are some of the test answers. So every time I come across a test answer, I'll say it happens to be a test answer. So that way you can either write it down on that sheet if you wish, on the back side of a sheet if you wish, on the inside front cover of your book, because these answers really won't change. The core objectives are core objectives and the same things that you want to learn each time anyway. The bottom section, a lot of practical reminders when it comes on doing CPR or the use of an AED. I know you want me to read it to you word for word. I'm not going to. I know you're disappointed. I'll send you a Hallmark card later. The next page of that staple packet is an AED information tool. On the top, you have the 9 manufacturers that make or made AEDs and the 20+ models that are in the market or in use today. I am familiar with every AED in the market because it's like my business. The middle section of that page goes over a lot of attributes when it comes to using an AED. The one that people find to be most amusing yet most intriguing is where it says it's fail-safe. Because the only way you could ever hurt somebody with an automated external defibrillator is by doing what, according to my paper? Thank you very much. Hit them over the head with it. And even then, they have to be alive. You can't hurt somebody who's already dead. If that doesn't make sense to you, it will by the time we're done today. The bottom section are all the places that I've had an opportunity to help get AEDs into one way or another over the last 20 some odd years I've been doing this. But enough about me, and let's talk about me. No? Fine. The last page is very important to me, as a matter of fact, and that's the course evaluation. I'm looking for you to write what you liked, what you didn't like, what was good, what was bad, what you liked, and what you hated. I plan on teaching for another 20 years if I can, and wouldn't it be nice if I stopped doing whatever was most annoying to you? You didn't write something already, did you?
Nope, not yet.
Good qualification. Not yet. But on the same note, wouldn't it be great if I continue with whatever you thought I was doing well? And there's only one way that I'm going to be able to figure that out most objectively, and that's through your evaluation. So I appreciate your feedback at the end of our time. The next thing I always like to go over is your textbook. Your textbook is the latest according to the American Heart Association. It has a copyright of 2011, and you might say, is that a little old? Not really. It's still current. The next time the American Heart Association is going to come out with any media will be early next spring, 2016. So every 5 years, the American Heart Association produces new books in reflecting the latest evidence-based medicine. So we are still current. There's 2 pages in that book in particular that we're going to be using, as you may know in the past. One page is page 27. That's the first exam that you're going to be taking today. So again, that's page 27. You may want to dog-ear that page if you choose. The next page is actually page 39, and that one has to do with actually infant CPR in particular, and that one's our second exam. First one is adult CPR and AED, the second one is infant CPR, and then the third and final exam is that written or cognitive one at the end of our time today. I will be referencing pages as we go along, so if you're anything like me, I'm a very visual learner, so if I'm able to see something, it's able to retain my brain much easier. Obviously we're going to do a little PowerPoint as we normally do. We're going to do the pinnacle of evidence-based education. The pinnacle of evidence-based education referred to as practice while watching DVD or video self-instruction. And then of course we're going to have that exam time throughout today. Now before we get to the meat and potatoes of our class, I always like to go over a little appetizer, if you will, before the main course. See what I did there? Anyway, man, that hurt, huh? But what I want to do is, especially for those that have not seen this before, or for those that could use this a little refresher, a lot of people think the idea behind CPR maybe is to restart the heart. Other people refer to it as being resuscitated, hence the abbreviation, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR. Some people refer to it as reviving, sustaining, maintaining, or even stabilizing. Do I think that CPR is equivalent to any one of those words or that top phrase? What do you recollect? Correct.
Not.
Where did my middle not go? I don't know why. Let's try that again.
Not.
It's still gone.
Not.
Weird. In any case, that's true. That's true. That's exactly what I think. But why? Why would I think that? Who recalls? Who knows? What's the success rate by CPR alone over the last 60 some odd years since it was first theorized by Dr. Saffer, the founder of modern day CPR?
11%?
Could be. Anybody else? So I would say 11% would be a luxury. By and large, every time I look at some study, it'll either be between 3 and I'll say 11%. So that would be around 5 or 6%, right, as being average. That's pretty low. How can we say that it restarts a heart at a 5% success rate? How can we say that it resuscitates, revives, sustains, maintains, or stabilizes? At a 5 up to maybe 11% at best. That's pretty poor. There's no way anybody can be stabilized by that. So really what we want to know is, what the heck is the purpose then? The entire purpose of CPR is to merely provide artificial life. Artificial breathing and artificial circulation, or artificial life, to buy time. Now if I'm saying artificial life, what is that person? Dead. You remember that one. But we're saying artificial life. Now I mentioned before that every time we come across a test answer, I'll say that it has to be a test answer. On this slide is your first test answer. It may go without saying, but obviously it doesn't, because a lot of people do get this one wrong. The purpose of the compressions is to provide the most optimal artificial circulation. The most optimal artificial circulation. That's what the compressions are for. Now if you're writing on the very back page of that evaluation, I'll be looking for that one back eventually. So I would choose a different page if you're doing that already. Just saying. Okay, oh fine renewing students. We're buying time for what?
The AED.
Very good, exactly. A lot of people will say we're waiting for the emergency medical services. No, we're not waiting for the emergency medical services. That's a 1970s and 1980s answer. Very few people will say we're waiting until this person gets to the hospital. We're waiting for the AED. Do any of you find people know if there's a defibrillator in this building? Right. It's right around the corner, just past the bathrooms. Absolutely, in a white cabinet. It's always good to have an idea of situational awareness, to know where your exits are, to know where a fire extinguisher is, to know where the defibrillator is. Every time you walk into a building, think about these things, because it really, bottom line, is about your safety first and foremost, and then anybody else's. This is one AED I train a lot of people on. This is the AED trainer that we are going to be playing with today. The first thing we can do with any AED, regardless of brand, is do what? Turn it on. Guess what? That's your second test answer. Turn it on. That's what we need to do first. My laser on my original remote broke, so my wife bought me a shark with a freaking laser on its head. So that's what I've been using. Anyway, so Dr. Evil would be extremely jealous. ThinkGeek.com. Awesome website. Anyway, so green for go. You think we learned that in preschool? Doesn't help. Doesn't help. Why? Because people put the pads on first often. The first thing we need to do all the time is turn it on. Second step is to apply the pads. Where the pictures show. One pad needs to go on the top right of that person's chest above the right nipple. The other one needs to go several inches below the left armpit. Why is that? Why do we have pad and then pad? Because the natural wiring of the heart, as you may recall from anatomy and physiology, is we have the heart about the size of that person's fist, right? Tilted just a tad, and the sinus node is in this corner here, and Purkinje fibers down this way. So what we're doing is we're using the natural wiring. We're taking full advantage of it. Third and final step for every AED, regardless of brand, follow what it tells you to do. Every AED has voice prompts. A lot of them will have light prompts, some will have text prompts. They all have voice prompts. So like for instance, if you happen to be working in a hospital setting, no matter what type of unit, and they have, of course, their monitor defibrillator on top of the crash cart, every every manual mounted defibrillator these days has an AED mode to it. So even if somebody was unsure of exactly what to do, or you have some people hemming and hawing over the rhythm, you could always flip it to AED and it can figure out faster than we could. This is another AED I train a lot of people on. This is another AED I train a lot of people on. And this is the whole reason why we're here in the very first place. And again, it all started with the Chicago Airport System in June of 1999. They placed an automated external defibrillator for every minute's worth of walking distance you have in a concourse, parking lot, wherever. They trained thousands of their employees in that first year alone in CPR and AED. And since airports are one of the top 5 places where cardiac arrests occur, it was a perfect place to start a program such as that. In that first year, they had 11 people hit the ground for various reasons. 9 survived. That was a better than 80% success rate. Yet nationally or internationally, we've only had a 5% success rate by and large over the last 60 years by CPR alone. Blew the resuscitation industry right out of the water. The earliest 911 CPR and AED is where it's at. As a matter of fact, my take is that CPR alone doesn't save lives. I think it's backed by pretty much good fact. But the chain of survival does, and that's a theme of our entire class. To have the earliest access to get that help, the earliest CPR to buy some time until the earliest defibrillation to restart that heart to a degree, but I'll clarify that later as I normally do, and then the earliest advanced cardiac life support, otherwise known as paramedical care, and that's where we're going to find our stabilization. It won't come from that CPR when somebody is still dead. In a way, they are kind of stable, right? They're not going to change too much. But we're looking for a little more optimism than just being dead, I think. Last little tidbit before our main course, and that's fear. Most CPR AED courses, as you know, do not go over any of this stuff whatsoever. There's 2 sides to the coin when we're talking about it. First side of the coin when it comes down to basic life support is competence. And you and I are hoping for the greatest competence through the practice while watching, as well as the role playing and critical skills testing that we'll be doing today. But the other side of the coin is confidence. And most, if not all, healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, and even paramedics for that matter, have very little to none lecture or information on legislation that protects us. for example. So, let's talk about the fears. First fear is, are we going to hurt somebody? Bless you. Second fear,
Oh boy, we are in big trouble.
that future litigation like we were talking about. And then lastly, come now, who doesn't like vomiting pumpkin? Bless you again. Fortunately, we don't have to do CPR on many pumpkins. I don't remember the last time I had to do CPR on a pumpkin. Let's talk about further injury. We know when somebody's in need of CPR, they're already dead. Can you hurt somebody's already dead? No. What's the one thing that people perceive as being worse is if you push on the chest? What can we do?
Crack ribs.
What's reality?
Crack ribs.
True. And it'll sound like that. Somebody did that in my class once and said, that's what it sounds like. I'm like, dead on, pun intended. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's exactly how it sounds. When you push down on somebody's chest, if you haven't done so already, and you're going to do some chest compressions, and it's going to sound like you just broke your knuckles, but those weren't your knuckles. Those were ribs. And you just felt some gives, some breaks underneath your hands. That's part of the game. How? Why? When somebody is 30 years and older, regardless of gender, what's that bone disease that starts to set in?
Osteoporosis.
And that, of course, makes the bones much more rigid than brittle. So truth is, those ribs will break. But as we already know,
Hasta la vista, baby.
they're already dead. So what's the big deal? So further injury is no issue at all. They're already dead. You can't hurt them worse. We can only help. We can only provide the most optimal artificial life. So let's talk about litigation. But before we can talk litigation, let's talk legislation. As a reminder, if anything, in 1981, James R. Thompson, the governor at the time in our fine state, enacted something referred to as the Good Samaritan Act. What it basically states, in short, is that for any person who acts in good faith, without any willful or wanton misconduct, is free of any litigation. Any person who acts in good faith without any willful or wanton misconduct is free of any litigation. You'd be interested to know that outside a hospital or healthcare setting, there hasn't been any attempts or successes against any CPR rescuers whatsoever. In 1998, we had an addendum to our original Good Samaritan Act, which included the use of AEDs. Any person who acts in good faith with the use of an AED and the appropriate education is free of any litigation. Again, no lawsuits. In fact, there's been plenty of lawsuits against people and places for not doing what's appropriate. In that same year, we had the Airline Passenger Safety Act, which mandates that every international and domestic flight carry a first aid kit. In that first aid kit needs to be an AED, and every flight attendant needs to be trained as such. 2 years later, we had Bill Clinton, in all his limited wisdom, he enacted CASA, or the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act. What that basically is twofold. First, provided for a federal Good Samaritan Act. So if you happen to be in a state, U.S. occupation, U.S. waters, U.S. airspace, you're covered. The second piece was a mandate that every federal building establish an appropriate CPR and AED program. They needed to have 100% coverage by the end of 2005. In that same year, we had the Rural Access to Emergency Devices, which allowed for funding for low-budget volunteer rescue departments to be able to get AEDs. Since it was found, like it was a big secret, that more than half of all ambulances in the U.S. did not have any defibrillatory capability whatsoever. Why? Because to this day, more than half of all ambulances in the U.S. do not have paramedics on board. Why? Money. You go into any low-income area or very rural area, and you won't find a paramedic program worth a darn. They can't afford it. But nowadays, every rig could have the opportunity of having an AED at least. Because it's about time. It's about time. In 2005, we had the Physical Fitness Facility Medical Emergency Preparedness Act, which mandates in every school district, every park district, and every fitness facility with a membership of 100 or more establish a CPR and AED program. They needed to have 100% coverage by the end of 2009. That means that if you happen to walk into any school in Illinois, you walk into any park district building, and you encounter an event going on where you need an AED, you could turn to somebody and say, find it. There has to be one here. By law. In 2006, we had further addendums to our original Good Samaritan Act, specifying for lay rescuers and professional rescuers. And then lastly, in 2007 and 2011, we had even further addendums that mandated that certain organized sporting events and every stadium establish an appropriate CPR and AED program. And then lastly, something you may or may not even be aware of. High School Initiative House Bill 3724 of last year, which mandates that every graduating high school senior gets trained and certified in CPR and AED. No longer an elective. Everybody's getting it because it's about time. It's about time. In this way, we all could feel comfortable that if we ever happen to hear,
I've fallen and I can't get up.
we could feel comfortable helping this woman out because there's plenty of legislation backing us up. Again, a lot of healthcare providers don't get any of this information. You could very well have an unfair, if you will, advantage, knowing all this legislation exists. But I already told you, there is no litigation out there at all that I find every Monday when I Google page 25. Guess what I find? I'll give you a hint each and every time. You would too. I guarantee it. And lastly, disease transmission. Even though I can tell you with certainty, with evidence-based medicine, to this day, that there has been very little chance that anybody can catch anything by anyone. Less than 0.98% chance that you can catch anything. But that doesn't cut the mustard. Why? This is more of an emotional issue than a rational one. And when it comes down to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, JACO, the American Heart Association, you name it, whatever authoritative or training organization, nationally or even internationally, they would prefer every healthcare provider to use something called standard precautions or universal precautions because it's smart. It protects us from the patient or victim, but it protects the patient or victim from us because we could very well be carrying something we're not even aware of yet, and we don't need to share it with somebody else. How do you do that? By being prepared. This barrier device right here, which is actually sitting upside down on the screen here or slide, this stem goes inside the person's mouth. That way you have a area of cleanliness to put your mouth on each and every time, since positive pressure ventilation is still part of our convention. It has a duckbill one-way valve as well as a HEPA filter. So that way, again, it's protecting you from the victim and the victim from you. It can be used for adults, children, and most, if not all, infants. And you have it in front of you right now. For the last 20 some odd years, no feather in my cap at all, I have been committed to providing a barrier device to every student every time, even if you've gotten 15 of these by now. Because I want people to be prepared. I don't want you to be caught where you don't have anything available to you. Can you imagine? You are at a family picnic. Somebody collapses. They're going to look to you. Everybody's going to look to you to do something. And Uncle Joe is on the ground again, and he barfed all over his face. Well, what are you waiting for? That's the point. You never know when. And by being prepared, there's no issue then. You already got it covered. So, my hope is that you'll always carry it on you. My kids know that I'm a major dork. But again, I'm not a run-of-the-mill dork. I'm a special dork. I always have mine on me. Always. 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 So inside that, you also have a pair of gloves. Those are the only two things I always carry on me that have to do with medical emergency related. Questions, concerns? Shoot.
So isn't it only compressions now and no breaths?
A lot of people think that, but no, not the case yet. There is a lot of credence to the idea of just doing chest compressions alone, and nothing would make me happier than with guidelines 2015, because we're working under guidelines 2010 right now. But when we have guidelines 2015 come out, nothing would make me happier than for the American Heart Association to provide the recommendation of chest compressions alone, because it has been found to be equivalent, if not more than equivalent, than our convention that we're still teaching today. October 15th, just after midnight, the American Heart Association will put out a press release, and they will divulge what the new guidelines will entail. And there's tons of people that are just in anticipation to find out what are we actually doing. If I had my wish, my hopeful predictions would be to drop ventilations altogether, would be to drop a pulse check altogether for basic life support, because we suck at it. Largely as a whole, nobody can do it well. You can take the finest neurosurgeon and he or she can't. Doesn't make a difference. I would love for the American Heart Association to drop the idea of doing a single hand for a child. It gives the impression that we want to push less in depth. It's awkward. It gives a wrong impression to parents if they don't know anything about CPR. Like, look at me, I'm only doing one hand on your kid. So, not yet. I'm hoping. Any other questions, concerns, challenges, uncertainties? All right, so we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of our class. So let's shut this puppy off right now.